meeting of the Finance Committee of Eastham. This meeting will be recorded, will be available on the town website at www.eastham-ma.gov and also local channel 18. We're meeting via Zoom pursuant to the emergency order of Governor Baker. Now let me see, is the chief on? He's on. Okay. So I'm going to, I did the agenda, wasn't even thinking having things before the chief. And so since he's here, I think that we'll switch directly to the budget of the police department. And so I'm going to, Rick, do you want to say something first and then we'll go to the chief?
Yeah, sure. Let me just orient everybody to where we are. I got to get Russ in here. Hang on.
I just did. He's in.
Okay, great. So here's your Article 2 operating budget for the town meeting presentation as it currently stands. Hasn't changed since last time. We're looking at community development tonight, public safety, and here are the chief's sections here. They'll also cover dispatching. And we'll also be looking at the library. And of course, here's our bottom line. Has not changed, 3.35% increase. And Chief, if you want me to share at any point your budget, I do have the budget book that I did send out to everybody just with the update, has the updated salaries for the prior year comparison. The total didn't change, but how they were allocated did a little bit. And this is what the chief is speaking to. So that's it, Jerry.
All right. So thank you, Rich. We will now switch to go to the chief. Chief, thank you very much for taking the time to join with this august group, and we appreciate it. I do want to commend you and Jackie, I guess, for the Code Red telling us all the things that are happening and not happening vis-a-vis COVID-19 shots. And I think that's a great system. I wish you had more vaccines so you could reach everybody, but go ahead, talking to the budget. The floor is yours, Chief. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jerry, and thank you everybody for having me tonight. Those Code Red calls are a fine balance between giving the information but not calling too much where people stop listening. So hopefully we're finding that balance where we're getting the information out in a timely manner and getting it out to as many people as possible. Again, thank you for having me tonight. A week from this coming Friday completes my first year as your police chief. It's certainly been a challenging year, a different year, as it has been for all members of our community. I think one thing I've learned over this year is the rewards, though, are, I've really realized what a great group of, specifically here at the police department, men and women that work here, that have really come together to make this year successful, given all the challenges. And on a broader note, I can't be prouder to work for a town where everyone from elected officials to town management to department heads to other department staff, I've been very involved in the emergency management aspect of this COVID issue, and everyone we call for assistance with anything, it's yes, we'll help, and how much more can we help? What else can we do? So really great team working here, and that's really helped make this year successful. The police department remains in great shape. We currently are fully staffed. All of our officers have remained healthy this year. We've had 0 COVID positive tests here, and even more aggressively than that, our officers have only missed a couple of shifts for COVID testing from being close contact. So we really, the officers, through us changing some of our policies, and really though just a testament to them, they've done a great job of keeping themselves safe and healthy. And I think they've really understood that this isn't just about them, it's about keeping this department running and keeping the community that they serve safe, and they've done just that. So it's been, we've come through this, not that we're finished, but we've come to this point, I think, in pretty good shape. For the first couple of months of COVID, we certainly had to make some adjustments. We we slowed down our routine community contacts, if you will. We stopped going to medical calls that we didn't need to go to. We stopped some of our traffic enforcement temporarily so that we could, or at least slowed it down so that we could really kind of study and figure out how we could keep ourselves safe and healthy so that we can continue our operation. Probably a couple of months, certainly before the summer, we had stockpiled our PPE that we needed, changed some policies here, and kind of educated our officers on what they needed to do to keep themselves safe. And I'd say by the summer, we were back to fairly normal operation. We've really had no officers out for COVID, which means our expenses for that have been very, very minimal. On an administration level, we've been busy all year with, seems like many meetings, sometimes per day, with the emergency management team to, make plans, on dealing with the COVID situation. So that's been a definite added burden on us, but again, we have a good team. We've come through it pretty well. And finally, with COVID, we're talking vaccines now, which I think is a light at the end of the tunnel, or some hope for everybody. I understand that, where we're starting, we don't have as many vaccines as we need, and it's produced some frustration. I understand that, but we're very hopeful that we're going to start the ball rolling here, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger from there. And I think without a doubt, we are prepared to administer vaccines to as many people as we can, depending on the allocation of doses that we get. Shifting gears a little bit, I just want to talk about some of our policies that we've worked on, and our police accreditation that we obtained a couple of years ago, and where we're going with that. There's been a lot of discussion this year about police reform. Massachusetts passed its police reform bill in December of 2020. A lot of that centers around police training and police department policies. Several years ago, we achieved certification through the Massachusetts Accreditation Commission. And because of that, many of our policies and much of our training was already in line with what was now required by the state of Massachusetts. So we didn't have a huge overhaul to do on any of our training or our policies. We did have to make some adjustments to our use of force policy, and we will make some to our internal affairs policy coming up, but those have been minimal, which has made, achieving that accreditation early on years ago has made the transition and the adjustments for the police reform bill, pretty easy for us, actually. There are two levels of police accreditation. The first one is full accreditation at the top of the list. The second one is certification. And the difference is really just the number of standards that you're required to meet. We've achieved the level of certification, so kind of the silver standard, if you will. We've committed going forward to bump up to the fully accredited standard to make ourselves a fully accredited department. We hope to achieve that within a couple of years, but with the changing laws and requirements through police reform, we don't have a true blueprint on exactly what we need to do to get there yet. So a lot of that's going to depend on when we're provided that information as to how we move forward from there. But my hope is within 2 to possibly 3 years, we have full police accreditation. If we achieve that, we would be one of 3 police departments on Cape Cod that holds, that has that standard, that meets that standard. Deputy Chief Deshawn is our accreditation manager here. He was instrumental in achieving our certification. He will move us forward to full accreditation, and he actually has recently become a accreditation assessor, which allows him to go travel around to other police departments and assess those departments to certify them or not certify them. I was very much in favor of that because I think that gives him the opportunity to visit other departments, see how they're doing things, read into their policies, and figure out how, what we can do to make ourselves better. Community policing, I think, needs to be discussed. Community policing is has been a staple in the East Ham Police Department for a very long time. We ran into a little bit of a roadblock with it this year, considering with COVID-19, our interactions with the public have been difficult, as you know and would imagine. And honestly, I've been having to hold our officers back from wanting to do community policing. They want to interact with the public, but we've had to kind of slow that down and hold them back so that we continue to keep ourselves safe and functional. The officers, any of you that follow social media, see our posts, you sure you saw over the holidays, we had a couple officers dressed up in a Santa Claus suit, visiting some of the kids around town. That was one thing we were able to do within the COVID protocols. We did a Halloween event as well, and we worked with the COA delivering meals out to senior citizens that were in need of meals. So not as much as we'd like to do. We've been trying to keep ourselves engaged with community policing, though. We're hoping maybe later this year we can start back up our Citizens Police Academy, Coffee with a Cop, that type of thing that we've had to shut down until this point. One of my long-term goals is to develop a small community policing team here at the Eastham Police Department, possibly made up of a sergeant and a patrolman or two, that can really focus on what we can do to get out more in the community. You know, what new programs we can be involved in, what other departments in Eastham are doing that we can jump on board with and assist with. So that's something I'm looking for in the future. It will have to be post-COVID-19, however. Our school resource officer continues to work up at Nauset High School. There's some change coming to that position with the police reform bill, mostly in the way of training. The officer will be required to attend certain specialized training, and there's certain laws that are changing in regard to juveniles that officer will become kind of our expert on, not only for himself, but will be an advisor to the rest of the department. So we're going to be looking for some specialized training probably this summer for our school resource officer. He continues to do a great job up at Nauset High School, great relationship with the staff there, and he's doing everything he can to be involved with the kids and develop relationships with the kids, again, you know, within the protocols of COVID-19. Grants that we've obtained is something I wanted to discuss tonight. We're always aggressively looking for grants. There's some grants that reoccur, you know, every year, or every other year, or come up regularly that we're always looking for. Some pop up that are new to us. The state 911 grant is something that we apply for every year and are generally granted. We were granted about $50,000 worth of state 911 money this year. And what that does is that supplements our overtime and salaries, as well as some equipment for the dispatch area and some training as well. So that one is generally something we receive every year, and we did receive that this year as well. In fact, we'll be looking at starting to close that out and looking at next year, FY22, for the state 911 grant fairly soon. An additional grant this year that we obtained was the Federal Justice Assistance Grant. We actually had in our capital budget for last year $10,000 for upgrade of our surveillance system on the building here at the police department. The surveillance system is incredibly important to us here at the police department. We have cameras that record in our booking room, in our cell block, in our interview room, and also just providing security on the outside of our building 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A lot of that equipment was put in 1989, was original to the building in 1989, so it was not digital compatible. The clarity on it wasn't very good. So we had originally $10,000 in the capital budget last year and another $10,000 coming up this coming year, which I had asked, the $10,000 from last year got cut out. I had asked to increase it to $20,000 this coming year so that we could get that project done. We obtained a $40,000 grant from the Federal Justice Assistance Program, or grant program, which paid for not only replacement of those aging cameras, but also our entire server system that runs those cameras. And we basically, in fact, it's in progress right now. We will have a brand new surveillance system on our building through that grant process, and we will not need that $20,000 next year in that capital plan. Also with that grant, we were able to do a mandatory upgrade to our electronic fingerprint machine, which is, they mandate occasionally that you upgrade that machine due to security risk. And that was due this year to be updated, and we were able to pay for that through that grant as well. Another, not a grant, but we were donated $25,000 this year to purchase our first ever police motorcycle. It's something I've thought about doing in the future, was adding a police motorcycle to the department. I think that goes along well with our traffic enforcement push that we do here. We've been getting, you know, in the summertime, we get a lot of complaints on the side roads that lead down to the beaches, and those are often very small, tight roads, and I think a motorcycle will be a perfect tool to operate out there. So we were given we were gifted a $25,000, the amount of $25,000 from a local resident to start that program. That will fully fund and equip that program for the first 3 years of its existence. So we'll be hopefully putting that motorcycle on the road sometime this spring, hopefully in April. We're also working on a radio replacement grant. We're currently in the process of renovating our dispatch center, and we will be replacing all of our old outdated police radios and fire radios. The state is going to a digital system. Many of our current radios are not functional on that system because they're old analog radios. The state is providing a grant to cover approximately 80% of the cost of the radios themselves. So we're working on that grant now. That's due in about a month, and we hope to, well, we will obtain that grant once we get the paperwork submitted. So quite a bit is going on as far as grants this year. Like I said, we're always looking for grants that we can apply for, and we'll continue to do so. I worked with Rich this fall and winter to put together the capital plan for the department. I'm excited about the new equipment replacement program and vehicle replacement program. I think that that's going to provide some flexibility to purchase equipment when we need it rather than just simply when it's on the calendar for. There may be some equipment that we can keep an extra year or two because it's functioning properly, and there may be other equipment that we need to replace a year or two early because it's costing us too much to maintain. I think the same thing can be said for the vehicles. We have a pickup truck here that we use in storms. Doesn't get a lot of miles. We may get to the point where we had thought it would be up for replacement, but it can be held for another year or two, and this will give us the flexibility to do that. Or possibly we have a vehicle that's just costing a lot of money in maintenance, and we think it's time for it to go. So I think that will work out very well. The operating budget. I asked for a few small increases in the operating budget, mostly centered around maintenance on both the building and on our vehicles. In the FY 20 budget, we ran over our vehicle maintenance a little bit. So I increased that a little bit for this coming year. And we've also been coming up against some expenses for repairs on the building that I don't know that the repairs are more frequent. I think just some of the repairs are a little more expensive now. So I asked for a little bit of an increase in that so we can make sure we're covered there. And I also asked for an additional $1,000 for our community policing initiatives. We've never had anything in our budget for community policing specifically. And I think that having that in there will allow us the ability to really get out in the public and, whether we want to host an event here and purchase refreshments for it, or whether we need to spend some funds on our Citizens Police Academy, I think that that's appropriate for us to be able to do. The salaries, much of the salaries are as you know, dictated by the collective bargaining agreement. So there's not a lot of control over that. Our officers get the cost of living raise, their step increases, and they also have an educational incentive that if they obtain a higher educational level, they get a percentage increase for that. So salaries at the police department are up approximately $60,000 this coming year, which is due to those three things. Overtime, I know was a question. A few questions were sent to me on overtime. Most of our overtime is dictated by covering shifts, making sure that the shifts are adequately covered, and also for training purposes. Training is a big thing that we do here. I think our officers are some of the best trained officers on Cape Cod, but there is an expense to that. So the vast majority of our overtime goes to that, or to just make sure that we always have at least police officers working at any given time. This coming year, we're projected to spend about the current year we're in, we're projected to spend about $140,000 on overtime. Now, if that holds, that would be the lowest amount of overtime we spent, at least in the last 5 years. However, we have 4 individuals on the department that they're either having children or their wives are having children that will be taking some time off this spring. And I actually just found out today that one of our officers is in a application process to possibly go to work for another police department on Cape Cod. So those are the types of things that come up that you don't see coming that can definitely affect that overtime budget. The officer, just on a side note, is considering going back to his hometown to work for their police department. So, you know, I can't fault him for that, but I'm sad to see him go. I don't like to lose anybody. So if that were to hold the $140,000, that's the lowest it's been in about 5 years. Last year we were at 166, the year before at 280, the year before that 239. So, you know, I think we're in pretty good shape at this point, but like I said, things pop up, injuries, retirements, resignations. You just don't really know what's coming until they come. But, you know, we do the best we can to keep that as low as possible. We'll also have some overtime expense this spring for COVID-19 related things like vaccination clinics. There may be some reimbursement opportunity for that down the road, but initially we'll be paying for that. One of the questions was how to reduce the overtime costs. Quite honestly, I think we've lowered them to a level where really the only way to reduce them further than that is to add more staff to the department, which would mean that if someone took the day off, the shift doesn't need to be filled with overtime. Of course, you get into the argument of what's cheaper, you know, adding more employees or paying that $140,000 worth of overtime. You know, I think keeping that overtime number so low, I think, you know, that might just be the best way to go for now. You asked me to, go ahead.
It's on the overtime. You and I had a discussion about, you know, how we process payroll and some of the elements of what we want to be doing on that. Maybe you could explain that as well.
Yeah, so one thing Rich and I discussed was possibly kind of separating out the training portion of the overtime so we can really see how much of that we're spending, and you folks can see how much of that we're spending on training. And then also as we go forward, better documenting exactly what we're spending that overtime on so we can give, you know, specific percentages on, you know, how much of it is training, how much of it is shift coverage, how much of it is storm coverage. We do have some of that, but I'm thinking of ways to do that even better so that we can be more specific about what we're documenting and reporting to you.
And what we're talking about is we do have a new payroll processing. It's been about a year. And so now that we've been using that, it's a good opportunity now to expand how we use it. And as we submit the payroll, to submit the payroll with the proper code so that we're accumulating the data with each payroll period. So it's just at our fingertips as opposed to an exercise to put it together. The only other thing on the separation of the overtime, Chief, was we're talking about some of the additional training that might be required because of the new standards. And so if we broke that out, we could perhaps better track that and fund that as necessary to get you what you need.
Yeah, there will be additional training, mandatory training coming through the police reform bill. So, you know, that will be an expense to us as well. We're still kind of waiting to find out what that exactly will be and when that will be, which will, you know, then give us an idea of what that will cost us. So that'll probably be sometime this coming fall where we're doing that training. Regarding the dispatch renovation, which is part of the radio replacement, is currently underway. A couple of weeks ago, we demoed our dispatch room and removed the console that was in there. They're in there working today on some of the wiring. We're hoping that by April 1st, the dispatch center is back up and running. We're currently operating out of a room here at the station in a temporary capacity. That transition went very well. We didn't have really many hiccups at all in the transition over there. And the contractor's coming in tomorrow to kind of kick off the renovation of the room, and we'll start to put it all back together. As soon as it gets put back together, there'll be training for the dispatchers on how to use all the new equipment. So I'm anticipating that room being operational by April 1st and having our dispatchers completely trained and comfortable, hopefully by Memorial Day, going into our busy season. The dispatch budget is mainly made up of salary expense. That salary is supplemented, like I said earlier, by the state 911 grant, which we've obtained this year and we're working on putting together for next year. The dispatch budget is actually down slightly from last year due to a retirement of a more senior dispatcher. And we just hired a new dispatcher who we're training now. So, you know, that he came in at a cheaper rate than the outgoing dispatcher. That's really all I have at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you. I think I'll go through the list and so if anybody has any questions. Mary, do you have any questions for the chief?
Yes, hi, Adam.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, given what you think you might have to get involved with the COVID, and I'm assuming maybe you were involved with the Little Creek aspect, with coming up on Friday.
Yes.
Is any of that covered under the CARES Act?
So it's my understanding, maybe Rich or Jackie could weigh in on this, but that the CARES Act has closed out?
No, it's open until the end of the year.
Well, we've pretty much spent our initial allocation, or at least allocated it. I do anticipate that there's a good chance that we'll get some additional funds. And we've been getting good news regarding vaccination clinics, that they'll be 100% reimbursable through FEMA. And also just recently, yesterday and today, there's some emails going out that non-vaccination clinic costs through FEMA, going back to the beginning of the pandemic, will be 100% reimbursable as well. Traditionally, FEMA only pays 75% for disaster assistance. So now they're going back to the beginning of last year and will be anticipating 100% reimbursement for all COVID costs. Of course, the big thing there is, when do we expect to see that? I don't know about Eastham. I think Yarmouth is still waiting. I was on every other month for 7 years in Yarmouth trying to get reimbursed for a 2012 storm. So someday that'll come.
Yeah.
But we separately track and account for that and are anticipating that reimbursement. But depending on the timing of it, that might be something we ask you to fund just to get reimbursed later, or we'll just carry it as a deficit, depending on the amount.
Mary, what we're doing here along those lines is any COVID expenses that we're accruing, we're categorizing for COVID-19 expense, so that when that day comes, we can produce that report and go forward.
So you'll know the amount of money spent if we're able to get reimbursed.
Correct.
Yeah. I have
And
another.
we are working as a region, so I've authorized Kent to send our EMTs to Orleans for their clinics that are regional. They'll be on our clinic on Friday. We're giving any help we can. It's sort of all hands on deck from all the towns. So
No, I think that's good.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I have another question, Adam. You were talking about getting the accreditation, and you're hoping to do it within 2 to 3 years.
Mhm.
What does that consist of or require? And
So like I said, there's 2 levels of accreditation. There's certification and accreditation. We are at certification now, and what that means is we've met a certain number of standards set forth by the Accreditation Commission. Most of those are policies. Some of them are, certain parts of the building need to be in compliance and inspected. So, say just for numbers, you need to meet 50 standards to get certification. Well, accreditation is a step above that. So we may now need to meet 75 of those standards in order to get accredited. And really, the higher you go, it's just a professionalizing and a standardizing of policy so that we are doing things in the best practice possible. So it's really good more got to do with policy than anything. So it's researching policies and putting policies into place.
so financially, it doesn't require, or does it?
Well, we went through a lot of that when we achieved certification. I think we've done the bulk of that, to be honest. I think that from here on out, it's more policy driven. So I don't anticipate any large expenses from that.
Okay.
And then Mary, okay, Tom, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, Sherry, just a comment to the chief and to Rich. I think the idea of breaking out that overtime is a great idea, as long as you're able to do without, too much effort. I think it'll be helpful. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, Tom's our overtime guy, Chief. Okay, Rick, you have any questions for the chief?
No, it's well presented. Thank you.
All right, Pete,
Nothing at this time.
anything, Russ?
No, doing a good
George?
job, Adam.
Thank you.
George?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Chief, can you talk about the competitive environment for police officers? Do you believe that our compensation for our officers is competitive with other police forces on the Cape? I mean, I understand somebody wanting to leave and go back to their hometown, but are we at some risk because we're underpaid compared to other towns, or going the other way, do you think we're high? And then secondly, of course, how difficult from a competitive standpoint will it be if this officer does move to replace him? Do you find that housing costs are an issue? So I'm concerned about the whole field of competition for police officers, both compensation and housing.
Well, to answer your first question, I think right now we're right where we need to be. We've always been kind of in the middle or a little towards the top of the pay steps of the pay for at least police departments in our area, in our region. If that officer leaves, like I said, it's due to going back to his hometown, which I appreciate. I grew up in Eastham. I enjoy working here, so I appreciate that he wants to go back and serve his home community. I can't fault him for that. I hate to see him go, but so we also offer a pretty generous educational incentive here, which is part of the salary, where if you obtain a degree, you get a raise for each degree you obtain. So I think we're pretty good right now as far as salaries. I need to see comparisons again to see where we're at, but I think at least historically we've always been in a pretty good spot for that. Housing's always a problem especially on the Outer Cape. And hiring is difficult. It's the majority of the officers on our department that stay here and make a career out of it have a connection to the community, have a reason to be here. Like I said, I'm from Eastham. We have several officers that are from Eastham, several officers from the Harwich area that grew up right in this area that want to make a life here for their family. So we're always looking kind of when we're hiring for someone that has a connection to the community here, has a connection to the area. So that's kind of how we go about it. But, certainly it's difficult to ask a young officer that's not from the area to just simply move down here, be able to afford housing and stay here. The general pattern is they move here, they rent a room or they rent a house, and you kind of know they're going to leave eventually once they can go back to where they started. The benefit of coming here, obviously, is they get all their training done and paid for, and then they go off. So that is always on our mind when we're hiring. We actually just hired a female officer this past summer, Vicki Wagner, who actually grew up in Eastham, moved off Cape, got a job in New Bedford and then Sudbury, and then wanted to come back home and work for her hometown. So we have her back here again, and I anticipate her staying for a long time. So that is always on our mind, and that's kind of how we try to go about it.
Chief, maybe we've had this discussion a little bit. Perhaps you could just talk a little bit about the cost to bring on a new officer and train them. It's very significant. And I just mentioned that because in my experience in working with multiple towns on public safety retention issues, it's not just the compensation. Obviously that's important, but there's a lot that goes into it. Part of it during the collective bargaining process, a schedule. We've got a favorable schedule here in Eastham, which is very helpful. Scheduling, insurance compensate, percentage of contribution towards insurance. But there's a lot of intangibles like a flexible and proactive capital plan that also keep people interested in working with the department. But it's really important because, and Chief, if you could just talk about the cost to train somebody and put them through the academy.
So it's very expensive to hire someone that has no training at all and start from scratch. There's uniform expenses, there's equipment expenses. There's the academy itself is not the issue, but it's that you're going to pay somebody for about 5 to 6 months and you're not getting anything back from them because they're off training for 5 or 6 months. It is possible to actually the officer I just mentioned, Vicki Wagner, she came to us fully trained. She had already been to the police academy, so we were able to bypass that step, which is an enormous savings. You figure 5 months worth of salary and other training expenses that come up. So, we're always looking for people that are trained that want to come here, as lateral transfers. That doesn't always work out. We certainly want to pick the best person for the job. So we have to kind of balance that. But But Rich, you're right. It's an incredible savings to find someone that's already trained, and a very heavy hit when you have to train someone from scratch.
Okay. You got any more, George?
One other one, this police reform law that was enacted by Massachusetts at the end of December or in December. Do you see anything in that law, as far as you know what's in there now, that might have long-range financial implications to your budget? Do you see requirements coming down the road where you can anticipate that we're going to have to plan for additional funds just to be able to meet what's required by that new law?
The biggest thing I see from that is training. And if you read through that law, it's all about training. And, you know, that's a good thing. You know, we want our officers highly trained so that they can successfully handle any situation they encounter out on the road. So that's where I see potentially the biggest hit coming is to our training budget. But again, it's still all developing, so I can't put a number on it for you right now. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think that's the area to kind of watch.
All right.
That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Steve, you have any questions, Steve?
Thank you, Jerry. I actually didn't think I had one, but Rich said something that makes me want to ask. Rich, if I understood you correctly, one of the things we offer that's a positive thing is our scheduling for the officers. I assume you're talking about how the shifts are arranged. Adam, could you just describe what that is and what are we very different than elsewhere?
So our officers work a 5-day on, 3-day off schedule. They work 9-hour days on their 5 days on. And what we have is, and I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. Usually if I'm changing officers around on shifts, I have to draw like a map out on the table to do this. So I'm trying to do it off the top of my head. But we generally have 3 patrolmen and 1 sergeant assigned to each, not each day or each 8-hour or 9-hour block, but each shift. So midnight shift, evening shift, day shift. So those 3 patrolmen and a supervisor are assigned to those shifts, and then their days off rotate because they work an 8-day schedule, not a 7-day schedule, so that theoretically every evening you have at least 2 officers working, scheduled to work at all times. Most of the time there's a sergeant and 2 officers scheduled to work. So if there's 3 officers on the schedule, one of them takes a night off, we're still adequately covered. If we lose somebody to retirement, an injury, a resignation, that reduces those numbers. Now there's 2 people scheduled, someone takes a night off. Now we only have 1 person scheduled, and then we go back to overtime.
My head is exploding. I understand why you need, but so it's 5 on and 3 off.
Yep.
And is that very different than other towns in the state or in the area?
I wouldn't say it's very different. I mean, it's something that's certainly done in other places. There's a 4-2 schedule, there's a 5-2 schedule, there's a 5-3, 5-2 schedule. You know, there's many different versions of scheduling out there. So I wouldn't say it's very different. I think it's fairly unique to this area. I don't know if there's any other departments right around us that do that.
Actually, it's Eastham, Yarmouth, and Falmouth have the modified schedule.
And these
Most
are
of the-
considered favorable, the officers.
Yeah, and so the long and the short of it, the hours are very similar over the course of the year, but just because of the extra hour worked per shift, basically it allows for additional days off. Not really days off because you're working the same cumulative hours, but you have more days free over the course of a year, you know, in the magnitude of 10 to 15, depending on the exact type of way you run it. So it gives you a little bit more free time, basically, but you're still working hours, you know, full-time hours.
So listening to Adam, all I could think about was thank God for computers, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Adam. I'm good. I don't have any other questions. Thanks for all you
Okay.
do.
All right, well, so I'm the last person, Chief, so, one thing, that the school resource officer, is that paid out of the Nauset regional budget? Or is that individual paid from that budget?
The school resource officer is partially funded by the Nauset Regional School District.
Okay.
So during the school year, the officer is assigned to the school Monday through Friday. When the schools close, the officer comes back on patrol for us.
Okay, Good, thanks. Now, I may have read this incorrectly, but I read someplace where Massachusetts was going to require body cameras at some point going on. And if I'm correct on reading that, what is that, what, any financial implications that you see, and when do you see that hitting us?
There's a lot of speculation about that right now. The police reform bill basically assigned a commission to study the body camera issue and if it should be mandatory. And what I've heard is that if it becomes mandatory, that there will be grant funding available to start that program. That, again, a lot of this stuff is still in flux. We don't have definitive answers on it yet. So I don't have dates or times or expense on that yet, because I don't know, exactly what the decision's going to be.
All right, well, that's good. Now, I think you partially answered this question. This is my last group. Figure a beautiful day in January, no snow, nobody's sick, nobody's hurt. How many people do you have assigned per shift on that day?
So so that's one of the challenges of staffing a police department in an area where we get so busy in the summer and we're not busy in January.
I was going to ask you about July next.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
So when I started working here, we hired 7 summer reserve officers, and I was one of them for several years. And that's how we supplemented our summer help, was through reserve officers. And it was actually a pretty good recruiting program, because we got to see, officers maybe locally that wanted a job in the future. Well, that's slowly been kind of cut down due to liability, due to training requirements. It really isn't cost effective to have a large staff of summer officers anymore. We do have one remaining that's been doing it for quite a while. And he is the one you'll see out in front of the post office in the summertime on Route 6, and he kind of supplements for us. So as far as the full-time officers, it really doesn't change based on time of the year, because we have 17 full-time officers. They work that 5-on, 3-off schedule all year long. We have a minimum manning or minimum staffing here of 2 officers per shift, although there are some times where we'll make sure that it's at least 3 officers, 4th of July weekend, maybe New Year's Eve, when we anticipate that we could be busier. But generally speaking, it's the same all year. The full-time officers rotate through the same schedule all year long.
All right, well, thank you, Chief. Now, does anybody have any other questions before I can tell the chief he can
I
go
do,
off?
Jerry.
Russ?
Yeah, Chief, just one question on the body camera. Do you see any downside for having body cameras?
So the only downside, I think, is the expense of it. There's an expense of the equipment, there's an expense of the data storage, there's an expense to, because when you store that data, that's a public records request. You have to be able to provide that to the public. There's redaction that needs to be done to certain things when you release that data. So there's an expense to all of this. It'll be a hefty expense. I think the police officer's opinion of them used to be that nobody liked them, they didn't want them. I have officers here asking for them now, because they think that and they're right, that more times than not, those cameras are going to show that the officer is doing their job the way they should be doing it, and they want them. So other than the expense, I don't see a downside at this point.
Thank
Right.
you.
Well, do you have anything else, Chief, you want to say? Otherwise,
Jerry,
All right.
Jerry,
oh,
can I ask
whoa,
you a question?
gee, from the
I
select,
have my hand up here.
well, from the select, I'm not looking at you, Art, from the select board, so you have to really
Never
watch
did.
out for him.
You never did.
Hi, Art.
Now, since I'm no longer on the finance committee, I can't ask my annual Route 6 traffic need enforcement question. So I'm not gonna do that.
Okay.
But I had a question for Rich. Rich, mechanically, how do you handle these grants and like this $25,000 gift? Where do you put that? Where does that show in our financials?
It's not a budget item. A gift by state law, you're allowed to create a separate fund. And you might have to do different tracking if there's any restrictions and that type of thing. So in our accounting system, we've got a general fund, which accounts for the operating budget. We have a general fund that accounts for the capital budget. And then we have a whole bunch of other funds called special revenue funds that accounts individually for each grant and each donation account. We don't, not necessarily every donation has its own fund. You might have one police donation account. This one might be a little bit different just because it's restricted for a specific purpose and program. But we do segregate it within the accounting system, and each fund is balanced with its own activity and its own cash allocated amongst each fund.
Okay, so it won't show in the chief's budget then? It'll be someplace else?
No, and actually that is something I want to work on with our town accountant, and we've been talking about this, and we're going to gear up this year to do it, is to do a little bit different, modify how we're doing our year-end financial reporting to show individually the activity of each of those funds internally. Probably some, we have it, we see it in our accounting ledger on a day-to-day basis, but it's not reported out typically other than it's combined when we have to required to do some state reporting. But we're going to develop a process where we report out up through our ledger internally, our own internal financial report for year end that indicates the activity of each individual fund so that we could accumulate it and consolidate it and report on it if anyone had an interest in it.
Well, I just think the town staff does a great job in getting grants. I mean, really does a great job, but I don't know if we publicize them enough so the citizens understand what the staff is doing and these things that are supplementing our revenue to allow us to do things we might not be able to do. So thank you very much, Chief, for those grants. And I'm not going to talk about Route 6.
Yeah, I expected that question, Art. Jackie, did you have anything to say?
Two things. One thing is, Art, remind me that I have a great idea for you and a traffic committee. So just remind me about that. And I'm thinking of Mindy Adam. And Rich, I wanted to ask you, have you heard any rumors that we might be getting some funding to follow the police reform bill from the state, or is that just another unfunded mandate that we have to just suck up and absorb?
I think the inclination is to be an unfunded mandate, yet there's a lot of political pressure to make it otherwise. So,
okay.
Especially when it comes to capital requirements such as the body cameras.
Yeah.
The only other thing, Chief, I'll mention to you, and I'm sure you're tuned into it, but the storage of body camera data and video and all that stuff would be a perfect thing to do on a regional basis. Instead of each department, you got your Chiefs Association, you got the Barnstable County that could perhaps accommodate it. And we're almost all connected via Open Cape. So in lieu of each department doing their own thing, if it comes down as a requirement, it really is a good, something that we should be able to consolidate and have one person, every department would have to have the representative, but you could centralize the administration of it.
That's been discussed preliminarily. Again, we don't have all the details, so we don't know exactly what we're looking at. But if not, Cape-wide, maybe something a little more locally regional, if you will, that we can do.
All right. Well, Chief, thank you very much for the time. You're always invited to stay in and listen to us go on, but you're now excused. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going home to continue ripping up linoleum in my kitchen. So
okay.
I'd love to stay, but
take care.
Take care.
Bye, Chief.
Bye, Chief. All right, now I guess since we're on the budget, we might as well keep going on the budget with other. I think the chief talked about dispatch, so I think that one's done. Let's see, who else we have community. Was it community development?
Library was next.
Well, library. That was the one we were going to zero out, right, Mary? Okay, let's go with the library. Go ahead, Rich. You're on.
All right, I'll pull it up just so you can have a quick look at it. This is part of the community services budget, and we're looking at the library salaries here, library expense here. Not much activity as far as changes to the budget. All the salaries are a result of contractual wage increases, and so consistent with what you heard last week. They're mostly Eastham Employee Association employees, so they had a 2.5% step increase and a 2% COLA. So wages are up about 4.5%. The expenses are level funded by and large, with the exception of one reduction, which I think had to do with the clams network. Cost went down just a couple $1,000. These are the
All right.
positions. The one change other than a cost of living in step is we are anticipating that this position is going to be regraded. And so we've provided for that additional funds in there, but it has not happened yet. And, but there's a pretty good chance that it will be in conjunction with the bargaining unit.
All right, anybody have any questions for Rich on the library issues?
I'd just like to make a few comments if I can.
I guess I'll let you, Mary.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Rich said, that as far as the expenses are concerned, everything is level. And the only thing that has happened is that we have decreased the cost for the clams by about 2,000. And the reason for that decrease is because we are being charged less. So that's good. There is a requirement that we meet that in order to get state aid, that we spend so much money on what I'll call books and ebooks and things of that nature. And if you look at that line, it's, you see, it's 53,500. That line has been the same for the last 3 years, 87,764. And in order for us to get state aid, there's a requirement that the town, or the library, I should say, spend so much money. It's a formula in order to meet the requirements for that line item. And if the town was to pay for that line item this year, it would be about $107,000. So in order to make that line item level, we've got to come up with the additional monies, and we're paying for those additional monies through the trustees and the Friends. So I just want people to understand that there are some monies coming in to meet the state requirements in that line.
Well,
And on the salaries, as Rich said, that's where the majority of the raises, the increase is, and the majority of that is, as Rich said, the salary, the budget, cost of living, and so forth. Other than, except for one person, which we are also up to grade. So that's why the salaries are increased.
I might just add, Mary reminded me, in last year, as part of our response to potentially reduce revenues in our budget, we, in lieu of cutting costs, the trustees were very generous in providing additional money. Mary, I think it was 30,000.
30,000.
And initially, in my first pass, I had assumed that was a recurring thing, and I was quickly corrected.
And I told him no.
And but we were able to, in the final analysis, reduce the funding, that requirement. So thank you for helping us get through a tough time last year, but we are not relying on it in this year's budget. It's not part of the funding of the budget.
Thank you.
all right. Now, does anyone have any questions concerning the library, either for Rich or Mary? I have one, just a curious, Steve Cole.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Am I correct when it says 0.88 full-time equivalent? Does that mean it's a 35-hour week instead of 40? Is that all that means? Or is something?
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
And are the salaries, the actual salaries for the 35-hour week, or are they for 40 and then have to cut?
No, it's the actual salary you were expecting to pay next year for that person in that
Gotcha.
position.
Thank you.
But an aside, and just for future reference, what I hope to do is, let's say we have some changeover. The new person may or may not be at that same step, or perhaps the position changes slightly, which would make it something other than what you initially budgeted. but I'm planning on tracking those going forward. It's a little bit difficult in this first year to do it from year to year. But going forward, if we had, to the extent we have any of that, I would try to indicate that in the budget. But the goal here is try to budget exactly as we need, nothing more or less, nothing less.
Is it a contract issue, a town manager issue, or something else that decides whether a position is 35 or 40 hours?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to the library staff who are not here and to Mary. It's just a great organization.
Yeah, it's working great in COVID. It's just phenomenal. I really appreciate it. Mary, one question has nothing to do with the budget, because I've lost track. How's the roof?
It's not fixed yet. We're waiting, supposedly, Deb and I have been working with Jackie on this, and we have some outside consultants on the task, and they're waiting for the proper temperature to come. I did understand that at one point they talked about coming in with to put a little tent over it and use heat, because they were having trouble finding 2 days that were at least 40 degrees. And yeah, so it's a big problem.
Yeah. Okay. I just was a curiosity question. Okay. Any other questions on the library? I don't see or hear. Okay. Let's see. The next. Go ahead, Rich. What's the next one we've got?
We've got the Community Development Department, and this one I'll just spend a little bit of time on the salary schedule. Just share the screen. There is an increase in salaries by quite a bit, and that's why I want to explain that to you. Expenses, just a slight increase. This also reflects bringing in the conservation agent and consolidating a couple positions within this department that were otherwise presented formerly in DPW/DNR, I believe. But in this salary detail here, the biggest changes that you'd see are from the economic development planner. It was vacant last year, hired this year at this salary. But the reason for the significant change is it was only budgeted for a partial year. I don't know if it wasn't quite 6 as, I think maybe is that 5 months, 6 months of budget versus what we have to budget for the full year now that we actually have a person. But that was a reduction made last year to defer that hiring because of COVID. And then likewise on the conservation agent, we had a vacancy, and so we deferred hiring that position, so therefore budgeted less as a response to COVID, and therefore had to increase it for our full-time position this year. But as it turned out, we got someone that is able to do the job in less than the 35-hour a week due to his experience. And so it's not quite the full increase that you might get if it was the 35-hour a week position. So it was replaced at, I think that's 25 hours per week. But that was it was not a full year last year. Now it is a full year this year, but at reduced hours. The rest of these are largely, they all are contractual wage increases for the East Hampton Employee Association, but a community development director, as part of our negotiations with the settlement of that contract, is no longer part of the EEA and was pulled out and put on the personnel code. So that change to get onto the personnel code salary schedules resulted in a little bit of an increase above and beyond the normal COLA and step increases. And likewise, with the retirement of a longtime building inspector and hiring a newer inspector, less experience, coming in at a lower wage, resulted in a decrease in that salary. And then finally, on seasonal salaries, the way the work's being scheduled with our current inspectors, there's not as much of a need for a call out, and we hadn't been utilizing this funds. So as we were going through the budgetary process, especially when we were initially trying to make some reductions to fit within our levy limit, we had a reduction here, and we don't think that's going to adversely affect the operation at all. We've been living within that for a couple of years at this point. You know, at some point, if we have turnover in that area, you know, perhaps we'd have lower costs with the inspectors, and we would perhaps would have to boost this up again, but that would be a relative wash.
Mm.
Then finally, on the expense side, just some relatively small expense changes due to actual requirements that department has. And I put it down here. Here's the ads. I don't know if it was a one-for-one, but mostly bringing in the conservation agent costs that were formerly in DNR and putting them in this budget. So
Okay.
if I
Any
go to summary here.
I've got a question.
Okay, let Rich go to summary. Go ahead, Rich.
It's right here. Here's the summary. So the costs are up just about $1,800. Salaries up about 40, just under 40,000.
Okay, was that Russ, I think I
Yeah.
heard?
Yeah, I have one question. On the full-time salaries, the planner / economic development specialist, I'm just missing something here. I need some clarity. It indicates, you know, 35 hour week at 56,978. And then Lauren Baca comes in at the .88 at 90,657. I got the feeling when you were talking about there was something that wasn't equivalent, but I'm just curious.
The 90,000 represents 12 months of salary. The prior year amount, I don't recall exactly how many months, but roughly, I think.
It was
6.5.
November 1st, November through June, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, how would you know that looking at this chart?
You wouldn't,
You wouldn't.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
no. But it doesn't happen very often, Russ. It just happened because we had town meeting at the end of September.
Yep.
So when we were revising the budget, we knew we couldn't do any new hires because they were in the budget until at least
Yep.
November. So that's why it's that way.
Yeah, the numbers just didn't make sense to me. at
Yeah, we should have made a notation in it or something.
All right. Mary,
Rich, back to the salaries, so the third item listed, the affordable housing, is that the affordable housing coordinator? That there was some money put aside last year with the CPA and wasn't used, 40,000, and it's on the agenda again this year with the CPA, and I know there've been some discussions about moving that in, say, 20,000 from the CPA and 20,000 in the budget. What's the story on that?
So you're right, that is a placeholder for that potential position. And that's something Jackie and I and Paul and whoever else have to discuss. We didn't add it in the original draft of the budget because we were right up against our levy limit. And I think as I reported last week, we've had some good news. So we do have potentially, depending on how the school district assessments come in, potentially we'll have some room to add back some of the things that were requested that we couldn't accommodate, that being one of them. But we've got to weigh, you know, what's the utility of that versus the utility of adding some other things. So we have to go through that exercise, you know, in the next week or two, honestly. We have to start putting that together to see where we stand. But if we were to add that, that's where it would go. And we would match that with the CPC money potentially, and potentially we could also accommodate it by utilizing some of the short-term rental, but we'd probably run that through the Finance Committee and the Select Board because of the prior direction of wanting to maintain short-term rental thing for reserves and other needs.
So one of the things you're looking at is the perhaps 20,000 from CPA and 20,000 in the budget?
Right.
Okay.
But Mary, it will always look like 40 in the budget because this is the expense of it.
Yeah.
right,
It's just 20 from one place and 20 from another place.
Right.
right. Rich, this is nothing to do with this, but when do we expect to receive stuff from Nauset Region for their request?
Jackie, have you heard this?
Yeah, they just did their budget presentation to the elementary school 2 weeks ago. So they're way behind. They're like 2 months behind where they normally are, and they normally come in sometime in March. So I'm hoping they'll do some kind of expedited process. We have a draft of the elementary school budget, but I don't even think we've received a draft of any of the region budgets yet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're waiting on, is the regional school districts, both the Tech and the Nauset districts.
Yeah, they haven't even given us a glimmer.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any other questions on the community development?
Rick's got some.
Yeah, I've got one. On that economic development specialist position, how is that person measured? How do we measure economic development in terms of evaluating that position and what it's contributing to the town?
I don't honestly know, Rick, if we have any measure yet. I think that position is called economic development / planner because we promoted Paul Lag to the director of community development, and he was already covering 5 committees and doing all of our planning zoning work. So Lauren is going to be half-time covering planning, zoning, all of those things, and half-time doing economic development, working with both the Tea Time Committee and local businesses on some kind of business incentives and a business incentive zone. So I guess the bottom line is it's part of the strategic planning process, and we'll see whether we will be able to judge her performance and our performance as a team by how quickly we can put into place some economic development initiatives that actually work. And I think that's going to take a couple of years to see, because we have to organize the business community and start to really put some incentives for our business zone and do some other improvements.
Rick, it'll be a success when we get an Italian restaurant at Nickerson. And we'll know if it worked.
I love that idea. We've always been on the same page.
All right, sounds good. Any other questions on that? Okay, Rich, we have another, I've suddenly lost my agenda here.
That's it on budget, Jerry.
Pardon?
That was it on the agenda for budget.
All right, great. It's my errors. All right. So
But
now we'll go.
thank God Steve is watching you, Jerry, because otherwise.
I know.
I've spent many years watching Jerry, you know.
Yes,
Well, he wanders off if you don't keep an eye on him.
I was going to tell Jackie that you have to blame Steve for me even being on this committee, but that's beside the point. Let's go back to the beginning of the agenda with minutes that I sent around from, first of all, publicly, thank you, Karen. We had a meeting last week and we had the minutes, and it's just great that we have them. We have any comments, corrections, deletions, whatever? None. Okay, do I hear a motion?
I make a motion that the minutes of February 2nd, 2021 be approved.
A second?
Second,
That's Russ, right? Yeah, okay.
yes.
We'll go down. Mary,
Yes,
Tom,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Russ,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and Jerry votes aye as well, 8-0. Okay. Now, the next item is the second rough draft I sent around on a potential letter to the editor, trying to keep it at 250 words. There's one thing I would think that it was raised to me and looking at, would like to remove from it. I talk about, and I think Russ will clap when I say this, I talk about, we've heard other discussions and so forth, but the real reason, but the only vote we have on March 30th is whether accept or not. And I think it potentially raises an issue just to even have that sentence in there when we say nothing else about it. We just dismiss it. So I raise that point to you to maybe just take that sentence out. And it's the sentence that reads, hold on a second. I will get it. It's the sentence that reads, we have heard many discussions, endorsements, and concerns on the project. Those discussions are healthy and should continue. Then it goes, however. I think those two sentences we potentially take out and kind of change it in, put it to, on our vote on March 30th, there is only one question voters needed to consider. But that's my thoughts. Floor is open. Let me get the pictures up so I can see you guys again. Okay, anybody have any comments?
Jerry?
Peter?
Yeah, I think I'd lean towards leaving that in. I mean, it acknowledges at least that we're aware of these other points of view and we've considered them, and this is our recommendation.
Okay.
You
All right,
know,
that's,
Jerry?
anybody else have any other comment on that?
No.
Jerry?
Jerry? I didn't get your attention, Jerry, was trying to figure this out.
Yeah, go ahead.
George wanted and Steve, who do you want?
I'll go with Steve, and then I'll go to George, and then I'll go to Mary.
Yeah, I think on reflection, we should take the two sentences out. And the reason is, if there are concerns about the project, and we just say, well, that's for the future, all you have to do is decide whether to approve 136 million, we're really doing a disservice. If they're truly concerns about the project, we can't be saying the only thing you have to consider is whether to spend the money. The concerns, presumably, are about whether to spend the money. And so I'm not arguing we should go through all the concerns and rebut them, which would be an acceptable thing to do, but I'm not sure that's our role. But I think by putting in there that there are concerns, and then we say, we all ought to talk about them in the future after we go ahead with the project, that doesn't work for me. So I didn't think that the first time we discussed this, but on reflection, I think it ought to be deleted.
I agree.
George?
Well, I agree that those two sentences should be deleted, but I think they should be replaced, particularly with respect to the issue of school choice. You know, if you read the article in this morning's Cape Cod Times about the decision of the Brewster Select Board,
5-3.
there was focus, and I thought it was very well stated that school choice is not relevant to the question of whether to spend this money for this school. And I think that we need to make that kind of a statement. And you can do it very straightforward. You know, we've considered the question of school choice, and our committee does not believe that it is relevant to the issue of whether or not to approve this project and these costs.
I agree with that.
I agree with that.
yeah, me too.
I disagree with it. And the reason I disagree, and maybe George, there's a way to accomplish what you're trying to get at. I'm uncomfortable saying it's not relevant. If in fact were true that only a smaller building needed to be built, and that would make for a smart vote, then it's relevant. But we happen to disagree with that conclusion because we would lose the state aid. There are a lot of reasons in answer to that. But I'm uncomfortable saying that's not a relevant point of view. It's quite relevant. We just happen to disagree with it. And so the issue for me, if we're going to get into that, do we do what others have done and in a summary fashion dispose of that argument? And you could argue yes or no on that one. I'm not sure how I feel. But I think that's the choice if we make it, forgive the pun. if we mention school choice, we need to rebut the argument or not mention it at all.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I'm more than happy to do wordsmithing around the
Yeah.
issue. I think that we need to address the issue in this letter. Now, one way to address the issue is to say that we have looked at the question of school choice, and we believe that it is far too complex from a budgetary standpoint to impede the approval of this construction project. I mean, there are operational issues. Really, we can't even get information. We can't get a response with respect to incremental cost. I mean, if it was a simple question or it was a simple analysis, we've been asking for that for a year and a half and haven't gotten anything. So, I mean, I'm sitting here saying it's got to be because it's far too complicated. Class size, programming, all that stuff. And that is not what should be the deciding factor in terms of whether we build a school this way. And, if we have to, we get into the whole issue that even if school choice is not the reason to build a larger school, then if that didn't work out, then the possibility of merging the middle school with the high school is simply a further reason. So again, I'm more than happy to review and participate in wordsmithing, but I do think that it needs to be in the statement. It's too prominent an issue to simply pass over it.
I'm good with that if we stay substantive as you're suggesting.
Yeah, George, you volunteered. It's yours now. We got 250 words. I mean, according to Mr. Ottorino. Now, I think you raise a good point in that we can talk about, we looked at school choice and there are issues of, it does things like potentially expands opportunity, but there's also the possibility of merging the middle school. You can try and talk to something about if we do the bigger school, it gives us, it provides more choices and opportunities to the town and the school district. Expanding education, diversity of classes. Could also be merging of the middle school. Maybe we could do something of that, but merging with the middle school was one of the things that I think all of you know that I'm not a proponent of it, but I'm really in favor of looking hard at that, but I'm not sure all of you are. So, and that's why I didn't raise it in here, but those are some ideas. So George, I'm willing to turn over those two sentences to you, and you can play some games with it. Well,
That's fine.
I'm glad we turn it over.
I'm happy to offer something for other people to comment on.
Yeah, great. So hopefully next week before then you'll send something around. Or get it to me and I'll send it around to everybody.
I'm saying, how do I do it without getting into trouble?
Well, we're not. It's not talking back and forth. The open meeting is here's what we're going to consider, and you're just putting it forward to consider it. No one will respond to it until we have it at the meeting.
All right.
All right.
Gary?
Was that Peter?
Russ.
Russ, go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I think the whole issue may be simpler than that, but it is still confusing, and I call it a red herring, something that distracts from the real issue. And I mean, what the opponents on this talk about is, the difference between, it costs $20,000, we only get $5,000, and yada yada yada. I think that's a red herring. The issue is that the choice is a state law. The only people that can change it are the legislators through, Julian Sear and Sarah Peak and people like that. The issue is, if we want the money, we have to adhere to what the MSBA wants us to build. And that is predicated on school choice. They go out and do the demographics and indicate that that's how many students they think will come to Nauset Regional High School. The red herring part of it has nothing to do with it's 20 grand here or 25 or 15 or whatever. That happens to be the rules, and you have to live within the rules. And the schools that are fortunate enough to be in the right position do it in such a way that it enhances their budgetary issues. We make money on school choice. Dennis Yarmouth loses money on the thing. And so I think the issue of what the numbers are, the opposition never once has said anything about going to the legislature with a plan. Here's what we think those numbers should be. Because they don't know. And they're just using it as disinformation. And that disinformation is being used, I think, it's my personal opinion, for political purposes. There is no rational reason that they should be against building the school as it's been proposed by the school committee at this time. None. But when you put out all these numbers that really don't go to the issue, you confuse the issue. So I think I am going to write a letter to that once I get a little more ambition sometime in the next week or so, which I will try to explain. I think that, and I don't care how you put it in, I think the bottom line, it's our only choice. There is no other choice. And it's the right choice.
Jerry?
Jackie, yeah.
So I agree that the letter has to be simple, and I think you do have to address it in some manner. But I think everybody's right. Like, I mean, Steve, George, Rick, I know Rick's opinion of this. We all call out school choice, and we all want to know more about school choice and the impacts, the financial impacts of school choice. And I think the Brewster argument is insufficient because it is a financial measure that makes tons of assumptions about what the community will decide to do. Like, for instance, does the Brewster Finance Committee and the people that wrote this really think that the Nauset School Committee and all the people that actually vote in all these towns will want to dismantle their school, have less courses, less advanced levels, less of everything, and eliminate, a third or more of what makes the school great and save $4 million a year in the district? Maybe they will vote to do that. I don't see that happening. So it's not a real argument, because in order to save that $4 million, we have to take a school that's one of the top in the state and make it less. And if you said to me, Jackie, I want to run the cheapest town government possible, I could do that, but we wouldn't get what we need or want. So, anybody can take a budget and say, okay, we could just slash this and pay for this. But the values of the community have been traditionally that they support a robust school. So I think it is a separate issue that the community needs to look at, and it's not an irrelevant issue. It's a good issue to look at. It just has nothing to do with the size of the school, because even if we reduce the size of the population by 200 or 300 people, you still have to have a new science building because the one we have is inadequate. You still have to have an auditorium for at least 750 people. Right now, it's 550 people. Even in the new building, it's probably not big enough. And you still have to have certain things that need to be upgraded. So it's not just one building that we can shrink and make smaller. It's like 8 buildings that we'd have to talk about, or 7 that, you know, instead of 8. I don't know, but is it worth it to save $10 million? To split up between 4 communities, and that's on their best day scenario, which we know isn't going to happen. We know those 2012 data that Bill Dugan is yelling about, $83 million. We know we can add, you know, 30% to that cost by the time we're done. So it's the cheapest option. The truth is, the $132 million building, as expensive as it is the best and cheapest option right now.
Yeah, the question is, how do we communicate that, as that is what should be evaluated, and the policy decisions on school choice or the policy decisions on moving middle school in, all those, you know, can go whatever way eventually the towns want, but that's not really the question that's before us,
Right.
because of where the project is, how the state operates,
Right.
and how reimbursement operates. You know, our question is smaller at this point than those policy decisions. I don't know how to say that in 250 words.
I know. And, but Rick, I think we can all agree that those policy decisions aren't irrelevant. It's not like we can say, you know, I understand what Russ is saying. It is a red herring, but it's not a bad thing to discuss. It's a good thing to discuss. We should be talking about it, and we should be analyzing it. But it's not relevant to this decision.
Exactly. I think we've just got to write a letter that says we're for it. We think it's the most financially practical situation, and get on with it. I do not think we have to explain to anybody what some of the discussion and reasoning that we have right now. I think.
I'd like to, Russ, can I, George said something last week that I think we should not lose sight of. The only reason to write this letter is to persuade voters. So conclusory statements that just say, this is the way it should be, and we think that, is not worth anything, Russ, even though we unanimously agree with you. But the only reason to write a letter, and I thought George said that really well, is if you're going to try to persuade some voters. And Brewster's group that's opposed to this is actually quite clever.
Yes.
Because they're trying to tell the voters, vote this down, and the opponents there are going to accomplish a lot of policy objectives that have never been fully vetted by voting no on this project. So George's obligation now that he's agreed to do is to write the most amazing 2 sentences in the world. But I think we're just arguing the merits now, and we kind of in agreement to find some succinct way of saying, those folks are wrong. Here's why. Let's move on, because here's why we need to do the project. And Jackie, you said something that I had not heard clearly up till now, and maybe I'm missing it. And that is, in the end, you can't just go to a 600 student versus a 900 student.
Yeah.
That's not the way this project is. But that's not been clearly said, at least often enough.
I don't know. I guess none of us know how to say it. I mean, I think Harry Chukanian made a great argument but it is they are really clever, because they are distracting people from the question at hand, thinking that they'll save money. And I think it's an artificial promise.
Would it be appropriate, Jerry, if he wished to do it, if George had a short conversation with Harry? Because Harry's just outstanding.
Yes.
And
I
help us do this.
If George wants to do that, it's fine. I thought the one piece of advice to George, free advice, worth what you paid for it. is what Rick said, the policy that, maybe we could write it, we think this is, you should go this, but the policy decisions on school choice and its benefits and costs, and or a decision to move the middle school into the brand new school are are decisions that should be discussed and discussed later. But the larger school gives us the options to make those decisions.
Correct.
And so I
The
think
options to
something
make
along
them
that
at a
line.
significant tax increase, so that's dangerous. I also think it's dangerous to be talking about bringing younger kids into a school. There's a lot of opinion out there that says that's quite a decent, useful thing to do, and there's a lot of opinion that says that mixing isn't such a good idea. And
I
we
just
should be
think,
careful about putting out another issue there that will get people.
I think the issue is a smaller school will limit our choices in the future. And that's just the truth. A
And
smaller
that's a great
school
argument.
will limit our choices in the future, and we will have to make them, you know? And we discussed this in the building committee. The campus model works because all the kids really love the campus model, but it also works if you want to take and segregate a group of kids from other kids, right? You put them in N building and that's the middle school or whatever. So we intentionally kept that campus model because of that.
Well, George, you have an important job I had this week.
Poor
And
George. You were really articulate in the newspaper, though. Linda Culhane did quote you beautifully. It was lovely.
Yep.
Did you see that, George? You were quoted in the Provincetown Independent. Do you get that?
No.
George, you made us all sound so much smarter.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, wow, that guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, Linda didn't quote the rest of it.
I'm gonna drag that up for everybody else to chew on.
So, George, Peter, you got a copy of that 3-page letter that Tom Conrad put together, right? And so to say he never responded is not exactly true. It certainly wasn't a detailed analysis of school choice, but he said 6 to 7 teachers, $700,000.
I have not seen that letter, no.
So I'd like you to, Peter and Jerry, I did talk to, we have Rich, and Rich is a secret weapon of sorts. And he has done school formulas before, and he has told me that if I want him to, he can spend the time to do that. So if there's a point, and I said to him, no, we've got enough on our plate right now, but if at some point we want him to do that, it might be worth having him do it and just get it done with. So at least,
have something to go on.
Exactly.
Yeah, George, I thought I sent that around to everyone. I think Peter sent it, no, Jackie sent it to me. I'll send it around again. The piece from the school board, it basically talked about eliminating 6 or 7 teachers, and I think the amount was $600 and something thousand.
Right.
I'm in March when he's here, I'll ask questions whether what it includes and doesn't include OPID and all of those kinds of things, and we'll try and find out a little more about it. But they did send something back. It was very cursory, I think is a good term for it. It's not a dump on it. It's just a cursory statement on it. Okay, George, you have a great assignment. Does anybody else have any more? Mary, you want to tell George some more stuff? Go ahead.
I guess I'd just like to get people's thoughts, given the fact that the Board of Finance and Brewster did vote 5-3 against the program. I'm wondering what people's thoughts are, and given the fact that the Brewster town is the highest percentage for the costs of the school, I was just wondering what people's thoughts are on how that is going to affect the vote.
They have the highest percentage, but they have the most households.
Oh, yeah, I
Right.
and the most students.
And the most students.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on having that vote of against, a 5-3 against, how that's going to affect people's voting in,
It's not gonna help, but
It's not gonna help, but everybody has to come out strong. I mean, honestly, if the parents don't get out and vote,
Hmm.
there's nothing we can do about that. They have, everybody who feels strongly about this issue has to vote, one
You know-
way or the other, and.
George, I don't know if you'll have room to put this in the letter somehow, but, and I think you've made this point before at this committee, but I think that $5,000 versus $20,000, the numbers they keep throwing around, they're just vastly oversimplified and frankly misleading, and they should be challenged. And I was thinking of actually writing a letter to the editor at some point, if necessary, just as
I
a
think that's the
citizen.
better idea, Peter, is to do
Yeah.
separate little letters
Yeah.
on separate
Throw it in,
topics.
But,
Yeah.
but I think we shouldn't just swallow those numbers because they're wrong.
Right.
Right.
I just want to say one more thing. I want you all to know that at the select board meeting the other night, at the end of the meeting, someone, a citizen, a resident, just wanted to let us know that she is truly confused about this issue and that it matters to her what the finance committee thinks. She's looking to the select board and the finance committee to provide some guidance. And I think unlike some other towns, our residents really do care what the finance committee thinks and what the select board thinks. And when we go into town meeting with those recommendations, they really pay attention to those. And so I guess it does matter, Steve. I think there are people out there that are really looking for, what do my leaders think? You know, the people that have looked at this a little more closely, what do they think?
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to get out especially a unanimous one. I think it's just phenomenal. A short letter in the Cape Cod Times, try and also get into the Provincetown Independent and to the Cape Codder. If we can do that, that's great. And then, Peter, I agree. If we can do separate letters. Hi, I'm Peter, you're on the finance committee and here's some stuff. So I think that works. But I do think George has he's got something to start with that I put together, but he's got an important assignment. But I'm really in favor of trying to get a letter to the editor from a unanimous Eastham Finance Committee in support of this school project on March 30th. I think that's important to do, and maybe the way things are going, as soon as we can, if we can get something together next week and get it down and out, would be better than waiting till later. I don't know when early voting or mail-in voting starts, but we have to beat that. That's my view. Anybody have any other comments or questions?
I have a question and a.
George.
I totally agree that the more voices on this issue, the better. Assuming, of course, that they're consistent voices. But in my opinion, the strongest letter that could be published would come from the administration of the school system. They're the ones that have to create budgets and implement budgets, and they have to run the system. They're the ones that ought to be able to comment on this issue of why the comparison of 5,000 per student versus 20,000 per student is a completely incorrect way to look at the problem. And I was hoping that the letter back to us on our question for incremental costs, I was hoping that would contain some content that could be published. And it would be published with the assignation of having come from the school administration. And I actually had a conversation, now this goes back a year, because I went up to the high school and I did a tour, And the tour was guided by the principal of the high school. And after the tour, I talked to him specifically about this. I said, you know, you guys are getting killed because people are saying 20,000 versus 5,000. I said, you guys need to come out with a statement to contradict that. And he said, oh yeah, he said, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to get together and we're going to do something. Well, it never happened.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
How much of that 20,000 is in capital costs?
Well, all kinds of fixed costs, I mean, you know,
Yeah.
that are going to be there.
Transportation too.
But it won't do any good for the finance committee in the town of Eastham to make that point. It
Right.
should have an impact if the administrators of the school system do that.
Yeah.
Now, Jackie, you and Peter are the ones who've been on the committees, you've been involved in all of this stuff. Can you talk to these people behind the scenes?
Yes.
Say to them, look, we think that the most powerful statement to address this issue should come from the administrators, because this is what you do. I mean, that's my suggestion.
No, you're right. And I think the problem, honestly, not to give an excuse, but the building committee has moved along its track, but the school administration between, you know, with COVID, they've just been 100% focused on COVID, and really that's been Tom's focus more than the building project. And I think that's just the truth because of the environment that we're in. But I think Peter and I can make a pitch for it, and it's an absolutely good argument, you know.
Well, I think that's one reason he came up with this 3-pager.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have been asking him for it. I have been since the school committee, the building committee started, because I could see it was going to be a demagogue, really. But I think maybe, I don't know, part of the reason is he just doesn't understand why everybody doesn't understand why it's a good program. I mean, Tom, he's worked since school choice was an option to build the program up for Nauset and get the benefit of all the students that come and the athletes and all the extra programs. So, but he's got to make the case. You're 100% right, George.
And no one cared about the fact that it's been creating revenue for the past 20 years. Nobody wants to recognize that, right? We haven't had the capital costs and we've had the revenue, so.
The failure to address it head on could easily cost votes. And I understand he's busy and all that, but in my opinion, he's making a big mistake by not doing what George is suggesting, and that is coming out with a forceful, and they're not being helped by the building committee and the school committee having all sorts of contradictory things in the newspaper. And the project is excellent. It makes a lot of sense. And for that voter who asked at that select board meeting and the hundreds like that voter perhaps, they're not following this as closely. And it's a big ticket item. And they deserve to hear from the horse's mouth why they've gotten to where they are now and why this is such an important project. And if they don't do it, I think they could lose some votes that they would otherwise not lose.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if everybody's aware, but they're doing these weekly Zoom meetings on the project. It's on Wednesday night. Yeah, 6 o'clock. But
6:30.
6:30. And what is it? I don't have it in front of me, but either next week or the one after that is going to be, the subject is school choice. So
On the third, I think the 3rd of March is school choice.
3rd of March. So, you know, so they're going to address it in that respect, but I think there's a lot of other media that they should also hit. You're right. Yep.
Right, yeah.
Could we arrange our own schedule?
I think the easiest way to understand this is the fact that school choice is state law.
No, it's not.
It's the rules that we work by.
Yeah, but we can opt out of it, Russ. We can opt out of it.
We can only opt out of accepting students. We cannot opt out of losing students.
Right.
Every town in the state is in school choice. or is run by it, or under its direction. Every single school. Now, some of them don't have the room to take people in. If the numbers are wrong, if the 20 grand is wrong, or the 25 grand is wrong, or the 5 grand is wrong, then the state legislature has got to change the rules. And this has been going on for 29 years, and there's not a snowball's chance in hell that they're gonna change that rule.
Right.
And particularly increase the $5,000, because a town like Dennis Yarmouth would, if it went to $10, would lose $2 million, boom, first year.
Yeah, okay. But George is gonna work on the letter. Pete and Jackie, hopefully you can get to the, school administration, tell them, look, I mean, my personal opinion is the fact that they haven't come out strong and come out with numbers that to counteract this, they have ceded the field to the opponents.
Absolutely.
And they have to come in now and come up with something quickly. I don't know whether, you know, it's their job, they get paid, they do it. We're gonna do our best to get a letter in that says we're in favor of it, and I urge everyone else, if you want to write a letter to the editor, do so. But I do think that I really, really want to have a unanimous Eastham Finance Committee out there publicly, not just at a meeting here, but out there publicly in the paper saying we support this. And I hopefully that reporters might ask George or somebody's questions, and we can say something on that. But we need to get out there. And so, George, you got a few words, have some fun wordsmithing, and
Jerry,
good
Jerry,
luck.
when do the people from Nauset Schools come before our committee? A week from now, or in March?
The 10th of March, late.
Which is probably too late.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, that would be a venue where we could tell these people they gotta come up with a positive statement, but that would be too
Yeah.
late.
Yeah, that's
Somebody needs to tell them that much sooner than that.
yeah. They've seeded the field because they haven't come out with something on it. So let's hope.
Personalities figured out.
Hey, Jerry?
Yeah.
Russ?
Yeah, while we're on the subject of schools, I think this question is really for Jackie, but I got the joint meeting of the Nauset School Committees tomorrow night. And there's only one issue on it. It's priority business, and it's a superintendent search. Do you know what that's about?
Yeah.
Yes, Tom Conrad is resigned as of June 30th.
Oh, he's retiring?
Yes, he's retiring.
I did not know that.
That was in the article in the paper this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Jerry, I just want to say that the informational Zoom meetings for the high school, the school choice one is scheduled for Wednesday, March 3rd at 6:30.
Right.
Wednesday, March 3rd at 6:30.
And at this point in time, we do not have a meeting scheduled
That's
on March
correct.
3rd.
That's correct. We have one on the 2nd, but not on the 3rd.
Right. Noel, do we have one on the 2nd?
Yeah, well, it's open if needed.
If needed, there's one on the 2nd. The reason for that is because at 5 o'clock, we no longer have a Community Preservation Act committee meeting in March.
Right.
So, yeah, that's open at some point. Now, what I would like to do, Rich, for next meeting, we'll go through, I don't know how long this discussion will be on the letter, but I'd like to have you prepared to go through looking at the article that will be on the capital plan, because we're going to have to go through that at some point, which is not really a departmental budget. It may be we won't hit it this one and have to go to another meeting, but but be ready for that, okay? Rich? Did we lose him?
Audio and video.
He's muted. Rich is muted.
I'm
Rich
guessing
is muted.
Left his computer now because his video.
Rick's not, Rich is muted. Okay, I'll email him and tell him that. Does anyone, Jackie, do you have anything else you want to raise? No. Does anyone have any new business? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Was that Rick with the second?
Russ made the motion and Steve second.
Oh, Steve second. Okay, I understand. All right. We'll go down. First of all, thank all of you for the time and everything. I love working with all you guys. Mary,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Pete,
Yes.
Russ,
Yes.
George,
Yes.
Steve. Steve?
Yes.
Yes, and Jerry is a yes. 8-0. We are adjourned till next week. Take